Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back. This is our second to last meeting, which is crazy to think about. It went by, this semester has gone by really fast and really slow at the same time. So we're appreciative that you guys are still here. So yeah, let's get right into it. Let me share my screen if I can. Wow, how have I've forgotten how to share? There we go. Sorry, my brain is scattered today. Cool. So welcome everyone again to the editing meeting. It's our 10th meeting, I believe. So this is the attendance code as always. Please take a screenshot for the QR code so you guys can get attendance credit. At this point, you should be able to know how much attendance credit you have or how many more meetings you have to do remotely in order to build up that attendance credit again if you've signed up for the non-tuition credit on the course. If not, we have posted everything on YouTube again if you want to watch them, and contact us if you have any problems with that. The deadline is really fast approaching, so yeah, just keep that in mind. So as always, to start off, the woman of the week. This week it's Dee Dee Allen, and she's an icon is where I can really start. Is she's absolutely an amazing editor. She is highly renowned and well known for her work. She's known for like The Breakfast Club and Bonnie and Clyde. She's pioneered new types of editing that like has really redefined the industry throughout her like career. She's known as like the film editing doctor, which I think is just a badass kind of title. And she's celebrated as one of the few auteur film editors of the past like 50 years. So she's very cool. I would highly recommend checking her out if you want to learn more about like the history of editing and like the important women in the editing room. A lot of the time, like editing has been actually dominated by women. It's in the industry, as in just in general, it's like a place where women have been allowed a lot of the creative freedoms that they weren't allowed on set and in other places. So editing is a great way to find really cool, iconic people in the industry. A really cool quote she has is, "You have to put up with a lot of bullshit. You have to learn more than anyone should have to know to be taken seriously. But once you have the respect, you have it eternally." Yeah, she's really cool. So I'm gonna play this video for y'all.
Nice. That's really one of the key things is when you're matching, for instance, which is they have script supervisors that are supposed to make sure that everybody does the same thing in every take the same way. And when an actor is freed up, they don't always do it exactly the same way, but if the eyes work and they're not basically in a totally wrong position, you can always make a cut. There's no such way as not being able to make a cut if you have a performance and you're watching the performance and you're involved. So that nobody's away when you're cutting. You're involved in what the character's saying, and you're going to close up, you're going over shoulder, or they have moved to another position.
So that's just like a short thing she had about her process editing, which is cool. And there's tons of interviews with her online that you can also check out, which I would highly recommend doing. So on to our presentation today.
Okay. I had to make this because it can be really scary. So don't let editing intimidate you. I am not a technical person. I love Final Draft and just typing up some words and letting it do all the formatting for me, and I don't have to worry about it. And I remember being in the foundations class for VM 120 and being so intimidated, and the professor being like, "Okay, here's some keyboard shortcuts and some footage. Go make something," and being scared out of my mind and not knowing what to do. But I promise you, you can get there. I may have mentioned this before, I'm currently in Switzerland. I'm studying abroad, and so I've been taking videos and teaching myself how to edit together travel videos. I know we'll get into resources later, but Google is your best friend. If you can type in your question followed by Final Cut or Premiere Pro, you can find a way to do something. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't snap to it right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just adding on to that, like editing is not an intuitive process until you've been working on it for a while. So So everyone starts out at the beginning, everyone starts out with absolutely no knowledge and being like, what's Premiere? Like, what is this and why do we use it? And so like give yourself credit, as Kat said, and then like step forward confidently, knowing that like everyone starts out from the beginning and like you can do it, basically. It's not as scary once you get into the midst of things. You just have to take that first step. So, Emily, you want to take this one?
Yeah, as soon as my computer catches up, I'm on a little bit of a
sorry.
I guess I'll just add to that. Yeah, I'm Women Emotions like resident editor, if you want to call me that. I still Google things because I have no idea how to do stuff. So, you know, even if you wow, it's really slow. There we go. All right. So editing is like the final rewrite. A film's born 3 times, once when it's written, again when it's directed, and once more when it's edited. Because when you're in the edit, you can actually cut out pieces, like giant pieces of dialogue. If you're like, this doesn't make sense, I don't like this, and the direct, you know, obviously, you know, we'll talk about this later. The director has to be okay with that. But you can rewrite basically the entire film, and you can piece the entire film in a completely different way than it was written.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add on to that too is like the editing is what creates, or at least conveys, the meaning to the audience a lot of the time. The screenwriter is the one who says like, here's what I want to write. The director's like, here's how I want to portray it. And then the editor's like, here's how we're gonna portray it. Here's the sequence of events and how people actually will understand the film and consume the film. So editing is the final layer of like adding the meaning, adding the subtext, adding everything into that film at the end. So the editor has a huge amount of power over the overall message and way people consume that film in general. So yes, this is very important, and it's important to understand, even if you're not an editor, of like how important it is to keep the edit in mind, even in pre-production or post or in production. If you're not thinking of the edit while you're filming, you'll skip a part that you know you'll need to cut into. Or if you're writing something and you have no idea how it will be edited together because you don't have that vision yet, the editor will have a really tough time translating your vision into what you need to make. So keeping the editing in mind and knowing that at the end, that's the thing that makes the film, legitimately like puts it together. It's really important just to keep that in mind. I can begin talking about this before Emily takes over again with this because I know it takes a while for it to load. But there are different stages of editing that you have to keep in mind. And just it's important to follow because editing is a technical process, and following the proper steps really helps like streamline the process and make sure that there are as little errors and miscommunications and like oversteps as possible. Emily, got it? Cool, go for it.
Yeah, so there's 6 stages, like she said. The first stage is logging, which is when you just sort of dailies and rushes, same word or same thing. It just means the footage that you shot that day. You sort it into bins, which we'll get into in a little bit, but that's basically just folders in your editing software. Then you do your first assembly or your assembly cut. You basically reorder all of the footage and the audio in the way best to tell the story in the sequence that it's written in the script. It's going to look janky and it's going to be like 4 times longer than the actual final product is going to be, but that's okay. You're just trying to sort it everything and get it all sequentially correct. Then you actually do a rough cut and you sort of place everything in order, shots in order, check it for continuity, make sure the continuity is not bad. And you allow for revisions and new ideas to be tried and tested in this stage. You want to make sure that you don't get super attached to one particular sequence of events because you're supposed to be constantly changing things in the rough cut. Like you don't want to be attached to one thing and then never change it again. That's something I struggle with. So, you know, I'm learning as I go. The first cut is just the rough cut that's accepted by the editor, the director, and the producer. So that's sort of like the first step into like your final cut. Your fine cut, then you go in and you like focus on the little details of each, like the exact timing, where to cut, you know, when to cut, all that kind of thing. And then your final cut is the final product. It's when you're adding all your details like sound and music and color correction and color grading and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Picture lock is the term that we use when the visuals are fully edited. And then after picture lock, the film gets sent to everything else like sound, color grading, etc. Picture lock isn't always the picture lock. Sometimes you'll have picture lock, something will happen, maybe the music doesn't match up great, so you go back in and you rearrange it and you have another picture lock. But in general, that's the steps in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way I view it a lot of the time with these kinds of stages is either like a funnel where it's going from really big to really small and like really broad and general stuff to a really like detailed and fine thing. Or I also view it kind of like sculpting where you have a big block of raw material. You have everything you can work with, and then you slowly chip away at it until it becomes something that is a fully formed piece of art. Which I think is just a really fun way of adding into that because I enjoy sculptures. But just making sure that like understanding that like the editor is not the only person working in post-production, and so as probably the first 3 steps the editor is working very like as a single individual, like just putting things together and like making the visuals and the sound like make sure they're like synced up and stuff like that. But once you get to the first cut, that's when you really start bringing a ton of people in, ADR, sound, music, and stuff like that. Once you have a fairly like standard picture lock, like there are hundreds of specializations within film, which we will get into later within the post-production process that are just as important as anything else in any other area of production. One of the main distinctions then in jobs is the editor and the assistant editor. They work very closely. And I'll wait for Emily's thing to load to let her explain more in detail because she has a lot more experience with this kind of stuff than I do professionally.
There we go. I got it.
You got it? Cool.
Basically, editor is kind of what you think when you hear editing. That's the person who's manipulating all that raw footage and creatively making the edit. They're the person that's collaborating with the director and the producer to achieve that end result. And they're also working with all the sound editors, and they're basically the ones creating the cohesive edit. The assistant editor is a little less on the creative side and more on the business end, if you want to call it. They get all the rushes or the dailies from the digital imaging technician, DIT. That's the kind of person that doesn't really happen here at Emerson a lot, but that's somebody who's on set, like constantly taking in the footage and then giving it to the assistant editor. They'll also meet the script supervisor to receive all the important notes. Their main job is to ensure that the editor can focus on compiling the edit and doesn't have to worry about any of the back end stuff like, labeling the clips or finding out where they are, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And just one more thing about the DIT is that they're the ones who are making sure that everything is backed up, all the raw footage and everything like that. Like once you've shot a film, you do not want to lose the footage because that footage took a lot of time to get. So the DIT's job, even though we don't have that at Emerson, is really important in the professional world because they're the one who makes sure we don't lose anything once we got it. Because reshooting is really expensive, and we never want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. So then another really important relationship within the post-production process is between the director and the editor. I can really only talk about this from the director's point of view. Emily, please talk about your point of view from the editor's side as well. But since editing is a creative collaboration and the director is in charge of almost all creative aspects of a film, they work really closely with the editors to make sure that their vision is accomplished throughout the piece. Sometimes, like, as the same with screenwriters and directors or directors and producers, like there's a lot of times when like there is creative disagreements within the editing room, but that is sometimes very beneficial to the film as a whole. At the end of the day, though, the editor is beholden to the director's vision or the producer's demands for the budget and the financial stuff. Yeah, Emily, as an editor, what would you like to add into it?
Yeah, I've worked with directors before. Sometimes, I'll say at Emerson, sometimes directors are like, just go do it, and then I never hear from a director again. And then sometimes it'll be like, okay, like I'm doing a project right now, but the director's like, show me all of your cuts, even the assembly one that's like 4 times as long, and I'll give you all my notes. And then I'll say, well, I don't like this note, but let me show you how to do this. And then she'll go, oh, I really like that. So you really want to respect each other, but you don't want to be on the exact same page as your director. You want to kind of butt heads a little bit because if you both have the same ideas, you're not challenging each other, and you're not going to have you're not going to have a piece that you could have if you challenged each other and worked at different angles and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the respect aspect you were talking about is super important. Because in an editing room, in like the professional world, like the editor and the director and sometimes the assistant editor will be stuck in a room together for months on end, a small, tiny, dark room with just a screen in front of them, debating over this frame over that frame. And if you don't respect the person like initially, that can get really heated, intense, and just unproductive, and will eventually like harm the actual film. So, and then just again with like the professional world, who has the say over the final cut? Usually, if the director and editor both agree on stuff, it's fairly easy to just say this is the final cut. If there is a disagreement, director will usually have priority, unless the producer steps in. Usually, if it's a bigger studio shoot and they say they X out on some kind of scene or on some kind of piece of content because they don't like it, and they have then the producer has that power because they have the financial responsibility of the film, and so they have to make sure that the film is at least somewhat profitable if we're talking about the studio system, and so they have the ultimate authority over what gets shown on screen. But disagreements like that is what causes like director's cuts to be sent out later on after a film has been released. So there are a lot of common techniques of an editor. These are I think the four most common that like any editor, aspiring editor would need to know in order to like start out. The first is just what a cut is. It's just fairly basic, but understanding just like that it's a transition where one shot is instantly followed by another, like that is what editors do. It's called a cut because when film was physical, or at least we used a lot more physical film, people would legitimately use scissors to cut the film and then paste them together, like with a special glue or adhesive. And now, even though we now do a majority of stuff digitally, like we still call it a cut because we are an industry of tradition. The next thing is continuity editing. This is the vast majority of the kind of editing that we see in any movie that is like released in the past, like however, like anything Hollywood is continuity editing. Anything, most independent films are continuity editing. The only things that aren't continuity editing are like avant-garde films or experimental films, because those like are actively trying to work against the continuity of like in the normal things of editing. So continuity editing is when visual editing shows shots that are cut together in a clear and linear flow of uninterrupted action. This type of cutting seeks to maintain a continuous sense of time and space. I could give you 100 examples, but I can't remember any single one because there's so many. But if you find a movie and it's like the sense of space and time within a scene are not interrupted, where you have that illusion of this has been one single like conversation or one single like event happening on screen, that's continuity editing. When there's no sense of like time and space have cut and shifted and changed, is kind of the best way I can explain that simply. So then two other really important things to understand about like techniques of an editor is the montage. It was invented by Russians in I believe the 1930s, or at least experimented with and began at the beginnings of the montage in the 1930s. It's just a sequence of shots assembled in a juxtaposition of one another to create an emotional impact, condense a story, or convey an idea. You've all seen a montage, and if you've been in productions or history of media arts, like you'll learn more about them. I just want to show one of the most famous examples of what a montage is to you guys, like kind of just thinking about what it is and when you've seen other things like this. This is one of the most famous training like montages ever. Can you guys hear that? So this is not continuity editing because they're jumping between places, spaces, and times. So like, he was in the train yard, he was in the road, now he's up near the river. Like, this is a montage that creates the emotion of like training and building himself up for whatever he has to do. But I think you guys get the idea from that, what exactly a montage is. They're really fun to play with, and a lot of the time they do go really well with music. So you see them a lot in music videos as well. So then the next other really common technique is the jump cut. And it's just an abrupt cut that creates a lack of continuity between shots by leaving out parts of the action. It's different from a montage because sometimes it's just in the same scene, and it's usually just like a skip in time rather than just in place. So this is a scene from a French avant-garde movie, largely credited with like, and the French avant-garde is usually the what is credited with creating the jump cut. You'll likely see this clip further on as you study history of media and stuff like that. But this is just one example. You'll also see jump cuts a lot in YouTube videos. Like, that's how people transition a lot of times. They're talking. So that was a jump cut right there.
Pourquoi vous êtes
Parce que
c'est idiot? Pourquoi tu es tu? C'est mieux quand j'ai où es-tu?
Pareil, je peux pas me passer de toi.
Tu peux tuer.
Oui, mais je veux pas.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop it there because I can't understand French and that's a lot to take in. But like, if you understand the idea, like, that's just what jump cuts are really an effective technique of editors to like change up how audiences perceive what the film is about. So yeah. Moving on then. I'll talk about this a little bit before Emily, you can get into this again. But there's, as I said before, there's a lot more to editing than just editing. Wow, I messed up that, didn't I? There's a lot more to post-production than just editing.
Yeah. So post-production is just everything after production, everything getting compiled into the film. So there's so many specializations. This is only a few, and also there's so many jobs underneath, like each one of these. But there's color correction, which is different from color grading. Color correction is sort of correcting the image's color, so maybe it looks a little washed out, you make it look better. Versus color grading would be like you have a scene that was shot in winter and you want it to look colder, so you make the scene look bluer. So color grading is more artistic. There's Foley sound, which is that picture you see on the very right is basically creating sound effects, which is a super cool job. You just like mess around with things, watch the cut and make those sound effects. ADR is something dialogue recording. You can jump in if I don't remember what it stands for, but
I don't remember what it actually stands for, but it's just when like you record audio over a clip because you didn't correctly capture it on the set at the time of production.
Yeah, that's that one. That's that one on the left. You can see she's watching herself, and she's going to be saying the same lines that she's thinking at the exact same time that she's saying that you can replace the bad audio. Sound editing and mixing, just, I can't speak too much on that because I don't do sound editing or mixing, but that's basically creating the soundscape. Then there's composing, which is obviously you're making the music for the movie, and visual effects are all that CGI and but also more simple things like it's creating all those effects that you can't do green screen, chroma key, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to go a little bit further into like sound editing and mixing, on a film set, the only audio you really want to record, like when you're actually filming, is the actor's dialogue, or like the sounds you see directly in front of you. If you hear any birds chirping in the distance, cars running in the distance, you hear leaves rustling, anything in the background, the sound mixer or sound editor has to create this soundscape that Emily talked about before. And that's just like the landscape of sound. It's a fairly technical thing for some kinds of movies because sound is a 3D experience a lot of the time. That's a lot of the reason why people think theaters are like really important, at least for the experience of a film, because sound editors will take into account like the actual direction of the sound that someone would hear something on screen and then translate that to the film, which I think is a really cool thing. And can be done on headphones, but not to the same extent that a theater can with multiple speakers all around you. Sorry, that was just a cool little tangent I think I have about sound editing. It's very commonly overlooked and just seen as something to like, you have the edit and throw to the sound editor. But it's important to keep the editor in mind, the sound editor in mind at all times throughout production. Yeah. So then continuing on, just speaking about editing and speaking about learning about editing, the internet is your friend. The best way, in my opinion, to learn is to teach yourself with editing, which sounds very intimidating. Classes like at Emerson will help get you started on it, but it will not teach you everything and every specific technique you need to know in order to successfully like create a film or like do the techniques that you want to do. So taking initiative and finding the resources online that you need in order to like learn what you want to know is really important. Especially since there are so many niche and technical aspects of editing that like you can have classes for decades and never fully get into every single aspect of editing and every single technical piece because editing software is always updating. There's always new techniques. So a few of the really good resources, YouTube, free, and there's everything you need is at least somewhere there. And if not, it's on YouTube. People make tutorials all the time. There are forums online that you can find people asking specific questions of I can't, this cut is glitching out and I want to do this and why isn't this happening? And then you have 40 people respond being like, here's how I did this, here's what problems I found. And it's there's a really great online editing community that you can find anywhere. To other places as well. Masterclass is not free, but there's a lot of really good stuff about the theory of editing and like a lot of really good interviews and people talking about how they edit and why they edit the way they do. And then lynda.com is actually a great resource for a ton of things. Emerson gives out free memberships basically, so it's a great resource for you as a student right now. But they have a ton of stuff that Masterclass also talks about as well, and just like looking for yourself is a really great way of like discovering what you want to learn. Yeah.
And just say, I think lynda.com is now LinkedIn Learning, which is free with Emerson email. So jump on that when you have the chance because they have so much stuff on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's all I really got to say right now about doing that, but it's really important, I think, if you want to learn about editing, is to like take it into your own hands. You can do it by yourself. It is something that you can like become really proficient in. And when you're applying to jobs, like, if you say like I'm proficient in Final Cut or I'm proficient in Premiere Pro, like that's just a really good boost to your resume and a really good like thing, because then they know that you're at least somewhat technically competent, which can be important later on. So that's the end of this presentation. Now Emily's just going to share her screen, and we're going to just watch practice and show you guys a couple techniques that are really like important to know while you're an editor. Take it away, Emily.
Yeah, so let me. All right, you all can see this? All right, so this is Premiere Pro. This is the 2019 version. Emerson recommends, and I also recommend, that you always use the previous year's version because the current year's version is going to have a lot of bugs in it, whereas the previous year's version is pretty figured out. Also, you don't have to update every year. You can always stay until it gets way too out of date, and then you can update to the current year. Doesn't matter. So I'm going to show you guys how to basically very simple stuff on how to actually use Premiere. So when you would open Premiere, it would have all your project windows, all the projects you worked on. You could click new project and then, call it whatever you want and hit OK. So then you basically come to this. Ignoring all this is here because I put this all in beforehand. So the first thing you want to do is you want to right click and hit new item and hit sequence. All this stuff comes up. I just kind of ignore this and I just hit OK. Sequence is just your timeline. So you see how this popped up here? You guys can see my mouse, right? Yeah, okay. So all this stuff pops up here. This is your timeline, your sequence. Next thing you want to do is you want to import all your files. So there's a couple ways you can do it. You could go File, Import, or Import Recent. You can also just double click and that'll come up. And you click on all your files, they'll all come in. Then you want to get into organization. So those bins that I talked about earlier, those folders, all you have to do is right click, hit new bin, your bin comes up, call it whatever you want. So that's what I did with these. I've got my audio bin, I've got my footage bin, and any sequences that I make, I would put in this folder here, in this bin here. So just some timeline basics really quick. You can toggle, here if I bring this in. So how you bring in a clip, all you have to do is drag and drop. When you do that, sometimes it won't match those sequence settings that you made. If you just hit change sequence settings, it's a little cheaty. You probably shouldn't do it that way, but that's how I do it. And then you have your footage and it's all great. So just to give you a little bit of a timeline here, you can toggle a track on and off. You can toggle track's audio on or off, so you can mute it or not. You can also lock a track. So say you wanted to do something crazy and you've got all these clips around, but you want this to stay exactly the same place and you're worried about moving it by accident, all you have to do is lock the track, and then now I can't click on it, I can't move it, I can't accidentally delete it. So that's a pretty useful feature. So yeah, the first thing that you do after you bring in all your stuff is you want to sync your audio, if applicable. So I have here, this is from East of Everything, produced by the Women in Motion Board. Just some really, is working? Yeah, just some basic clips. So what I do when I bring in all my footage, I will look through every single piece and look at the slate and see what scene it is. So see here, this is scene 2E, take 2. So what I'll do is I'll just name my files 2E2. You can name them however you want. That's just how I do it. Same thing with my audio. So I'm going to drag my audio in and I'm going to delete. And it's fine. So the slate, sync your audio. So what you want to do is you find, excuse me. You want to find the exact place where the slate closes. You can go frame by frame. I'm just pressing the enter key. That's the exact frame where it closes. So I can zoom in here just by scrolling this down, and I can make a marker, and you can see I already have a marker here, but I'll make another one. All you do is press M, and I don't know if you saw that there's a second marker that just popped up. Put it over here, press M, marker. So now you do the same thing, but now you have to find it in the audio. So what I'll do is I'll mute this track. I'll come over here and I'll just listen.
Slate, scene 2E, take 2.
And there's that clap. Now I already marked this, but you do the same thing. You would find this, hit M to mark it. And then all you have to do is drag these and they'll snap. You can see they'll snap right there. So it's really easy. I don't have to worry about lining it up too much. Another thing you can do, if you want to do it really quickly, just visually, you can always look at the waveform and you can see that there's a peak here and there's a peak here and you can match those up visually. I recommend doing it the first way though. So now I'm all synced up. If I play these both at the same time,
2E, take 2.
you're not going to be able to tell that there's two things there. But I want to get rid of this audio because this was the camera's internal microphone. So what I'll do is I'll right click on this. I'll hit unlink. And now I can click on these freely. They're not attached anymore. I can delete this just by pressing backspace. And then I can select these two and do the same thing, just reverse, right click, hit link. And now these two things are linked. And so now they're one clip with the audio.
Scene 2E, take 2.
Now, there's one thing I wanna address is that if you
2E, take 2.
and this is by no means me putting the other board on blast. If you notice over here,
Scene 2E, take 2.
so it's only coming through the left. If you were wearing headphones, it would only be coming through the left headphone. That's actually really easy to fix, and this is something that I Googled when I didn't know how to do it. So all you would do is you come over to your effects tab here, and you can type in fill. And because there's no audio in the right channel, but there is in the left channel, I'll just bring this fill right with left, drag it down, and then I'll hit play. And now it's coming through both headphones. So that's just a little trick. Audio can be hard. Sometimes you only record one track, and so that's just a really easy fix. That being said, don't just say, let's fix it in post. Try to do it on set. I'm not putting you on blast.
Sorry.
So yeah, now let's switch over to our editing tab. So say I want I sync the audio of these. By the way, if you notice, you can have multiple sequences open at the same time. This is really useful if you want to edit scene by scene. Yeah, you learn something new every day.
I really do.
So say I want this is a wide shot, medium close up. Once it gets there, this is a medium close up. Same scene, same lines, just different shots. So say I want to cut to a close up right around here. I want to see her reaction to 1920 cigarettes.
Hey.
Cigarette. Is that what it is? Right?
It's 1960s.
Oh, 1960s, excuse me. I don't know my decades. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this just with M. I'm not sure why it did that, but there you go. So you can also mark directly on the timeline if the marking on the clip is being weird. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find a decent reaction shot, probably from the same, she's not holding the teddy bear over here. Oh no, she is. Oh, excuse me, never mind. So yeah, I'll find a good reaction shot. Let's just go with something like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out. So you see over here, this is your toolbar. This is your razor tool. You can also switch to it by hitting C. But I know it's a lot to remember, keyboard shortcuts, so they're just over here just so you remember. And I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to take from here to say here. I'll switch back to my arrow, which is just hitting V or hitting over here. And now what I'm just going to put this on separate tracks and drag them over. And Premiere works like Photoshop in that whatever is on the top layer is the thing you see. So I could turn this layer off and do that. If I turn it on, you do see it. So now we've got this reaction here.
Sat there and took it. When I finished.
That's continuity. I mean, just to show you guys how to actually do a reaction. So then you also have this audio down here. If you don't want to use that audio because you already have this track, you would just do the same thing. Unlink it, delete the audio, then you only have one audio track. So let's say, open another sequence for you. let's say I messed up and there's supposed to be a line in here where Alden says, yeah.
It's bound to happen sometime.
But
I used to visit.
cut it out. What I can do is I have that line here.
Yeah.
So there's a couple ways I could put this. I could put this here. One of the ways I could do it is I could zoom all the way out, select everything, zoom in, move it all over, bring this in or keep it where it is, delete the space here, and then I have what I want.
It's bound to happen sometime.
Yeah.
That is so much work. If you have a really big project and you have to zoom all the way out, so like everything on a bunch of different tracks. So there's a much easier way to do it. You can click this, hold Control or Command, whichever operating device you have, and you see how this like little flag thing pops up. All you have to do is let go of your mouse. Hello. There we go. I don't know why that wasn't working. All you have to do is let go, and you notice that it just made the space for me. I didn't have to zoom all the way out, move it all over. All I had to do was Control click, drop it in. So that's cool and all. But what if I actually want this to be much longer? I can do the same thing. You know, zoom all the way out, move everything over, you know, make sure I get it precisely right, move everything over, deselect everything. There's this little red thing here that's just a way to make your clip longer. And then I could
About the smoking and the cancer and all.
It's still a lot of work. So what I could do instead is I can come over here to Ripple Edit tool, or B, hit B. And now you notice that it's yellow instead of red. All I have to do is move it over how I want it, and it just sort of adjusts it. If I did that with my non-Ripple Edit tool, it doesn't work. So Ripple Edit will save you a lot of time. So that is pretty much the basics that I wanted to show you guys. If you guys have any specific questions, or if you want to see anything specific. Oh, one more thing, save regularly. Just hit Control S, or you can come up here to File and hit Save. It's just like anything. Sometimes Premiere crashes and then you lose all your work. So that's that. I mean, I don't know what if you guys want to see anything else or.
Before you stop sharing the screen, can you show each of the tabs that are up on the top of the screen?
Yeah, so assembly and editing are pretty similar. I just use assembly to bring all my clips in and then sort them all. Learning, again, is really similar to assembly and editing. Color is where we start to see a little bit different. So I could come over here to my color tab, I could come over here to my curves and adjust the white, or adjust the red or something like that. So I could add more red, I could add less red. Effects is where all of your effects are, all your effects and all your transitions. So you can see like audio effects, audio transitions, video effects, and then over here is where that specific clips transition or that effects controls are. So even like, scale, position, if you have an effect on it, it would be down here somewhere, and you could actually do have an effect on it. So you can come down here and, change the temperature, stuff like that. Audio is where you would focus on audio, obviously. You can look at the levels more closely. Graphics is where you would create graphics, lower thirds, anything like that. You could click this, drag it in. You have a graphic up here, if it'll load. Yep. And then you could just use your text tool, change the text. And then your libraries are just all the stuff on your computer if you wanted to use it that way. I don't typically use this tab. I'll just bring up like my file folder. But that's all the tabs in Premiere. And you can always move things around if you don't like where they are. So say if I was in editing and I didn't like that my bin was over here, I wanted to have it up here, I can move it. Gives you more space down here. I like having it down here though. So it's really flexible, really you can personalize it, move things around.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, for going through that and just basic tutorial like introduction and stuff. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot of new things, and I've been editing for years now, so like I appreciate it. Yeah, just I think another important thing to just note is just like you'll never stop learning with editing. There's always a new trick, always something else like around the corner. And so collaborating and working with other people, learning from their tricks and techniques, and then like sharing yours and just making sure it's a collaborative environment, because editing can get pretty lonely sometimes. Like just making sure that you work together with your editors and never stop learning is just really important. So again, thank you, Emily, for sharing what you know.
Questions about everything, but also specifically editing, post in the Facebook group. If I see it, I'll respond to it, or I'll Google it and then respond to it. But yeah, just we are a community here, so we want to help each other.
Also, it's really good to hear from like other people who do editing, because I know for myself, like I'm very much a self-taught editor, and I'm like, oh, the Ripple tool, I never use that. I should probably use that more often, And it's like when you're self-teaching, you have your little niche ways of doing things, and sometimes they're very effective and sometimes they suck, and you just forget how to do things the more easy way. So always being in contact with other editors or people who know how to use Premiere or Final Cut, whichever one is your preferred method of editing, is like a great way to make your workflow the most effective that it can be. And also using online internet resources as well. Like I know my entire YouTube recommendation page is how to use Premiere and all of that, and gets boring watching it, but I'm like, well, now I feel like I know everything, and it's good to have that little, piece of information in your tool belt, just so you can have that, as Julia was saying, on your resume. And actually then if you are put in a position where you have to edit something, you can do it. It's not just like a BS statement on your resume. Like you actually know how to work the certain softwares and make something look good.
Yeah, exactly. So we still have a little bit of time left over. Does anyone have questions, comments, things, tricks that they've learned from their own editing experience? Anything they want to share with the group about editing?
I will say that if you don't like using Premiere, all the stuff I showed you is pretty similar to Final Cut. The tools are called something different and they have different shortcuts, but it's what I showed you was pretty universal to all editing software.
Mm-hmm. Well, if no one else wants to add in things or have any questions, we can let you out like a couple minutes early. Thank you guys all for coming again. So next week we're going to have our fall showcase. We're not actually filming women in motion made things, but we are filming female-led and female-centric films, and then having discussions and panels on them and just talking about them and enjoying kind of a low stress, relaxing kind of final meeting. We will not be having an in-person meeting next week. So the virtual meeting will go a little bit longer, but we'll be watching films and enjoying each other's company. So we hope you guys join us, and hopefully we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Emily, for that great tutorial too.
For modeling.
Yeah. I learned actually so much.
I didn't realize how much I didn't know about editing until now.